Alrighty, welcome back. We're in Chapter 3 of Science of Flight. We're looking at Lesson 2 today, which talks about the protective equipment that pilots use to overcome the physiology problems of flying, the hypoxia, the G's. The title of Lesson 2 is Protective Equipment and Aircrew Training, on page 240, 241. If you have your books with you. Some of the vocabulary important that we're going through today is ejection seat, simulators, altitude chambers, centrifuge. We talked about that yesterday. Bleed air, full pressure suits, parachutes, static line. I guess one of the most unusual things about flying, which a lot of civilians do not understand. Let me turn this on here so we can see. There we go. Is the protective equipment used by the pilots and the astronauts are quite different than what we use in like a car. And if you look at this picture here on the bottom of page 242, it talks about bleed air, which is actually compressed air from the engine compressors. So you have a turbine fan engine, and you take extra air that's coming off the turbine fans, and you use that to basically pressurize the cabins. Yesterday we talked about high altitude breathing and how it can decrease the amount of oxygen in the air and actually give you hypoxia. We went over the Payne Stewart golf player accident where his cabin pressure was never in effect for his jet, and it ended up killing his pilots and him. This is exactly this picture here at the bottom of the page 242 actually shows how you actually get pressurized bleed air pressure from the engines to pressurize your cabin so that it's not up at the altitude you're flying. Yesterday I did say 8,000 feet, and that's exactly what it says here in the paperwork here, the text on 242, that about 8,000 feet is the normal altitude that you're flying in your cabin when you go on these civilian planes, the Deltas, the Uniteds. Even though you're up at 30 or 40,000 feet, it feels like you're at 8,000 feet. So here in Arizona, that's sort of like Flagstaff. Is 7,000 feet? I think the continental divide of Arizona is about 8,000 feet. So even though we're on the ground here, it's the same pressure altitude that it would be just like you're flying a Delta plane from Phoenix to, say, Atlanta. On the top of page 243, it talks about cabin pressure and actual altimeter indicator of what your actual pressure is. This is what every pilot has in these planes so that you can look at a gauge and determine whether or not your cabin is pressurized. Obviously, the people in the Payne Stewart accident missed that, and they did not realize their cabin pressure was not in effect, and they ended up dying because of it. Differential pressure is the pressure difference between the cabin pressure and the atmosphere pressure outside the aircraft. If you're at 30,000 feet and the cabin pressure is 8,000 feet, then the differential pressure is 22. That is also the problem if you have a rapid decompression. If this system fails, and of course it's all just seals and inflated rubber seals around the doors and the canopies, if you're dealing with fighters, and you have a rapid decompression, that's when you're talking about the time of useful consciousness that was on one of these other displays, which can be in the order of seconds or 1 minute at 30 and 40,000 feet. You have a time of useful consciousness. When you're at that altitude and the pilot has a rapid decompression, what do they need to do? What is the emergency procedures?
Straight down.
Yes, I mean descend as quick as possible. Correct. Below what altitude? Yes, sir.
14,000 feet.
14,000 is a great guess. It's actually 18,000 feet. Okay, 14,000 feet is what the height of some of these mountains in Arizona, and but really 18,000 feet is where you can easily breathe and have the density of oxygen, so it's no problem. We actually had an incident down in Yuma, and you guys might have remembered a couple years ago, where a airplane pilot, and of course I hate to say the airline and get it wrong because we're online, but I think it was Southwest Airline, actually had a top of the aircraft come apart, and it was a hole in the aircraft, and it was a rapid decompression, and the pilot was flying to LA, and he immediately descended below 18,000 feet and had an emergency landing at Yuma Airport, which is a joint Marine Corps, right? It's a Marine Corps air station down there. They're not used to having Southwest planes land there, but he did an excellent job. Excellent job. It is not exactly like Hollywood movies. Just because there's a hole in the plane, your seatmate doesn't get sucked out the hole. They could, but generally they don't. You have your seatbelt on, and holes are small and people are big. But he did an excellent job of descending down, and there was no injuries. Everybody's disconcerted. But that's exactly what we're talking about here, the differential pressure between the outside and the inside pressure. On page 244, explosive decompression and rapid decompression. Explosive decompression is a change in the cabin pressure that happens faster than the lungs can decompress. Rapid decompression. I told you that flying F-15s, I've actually had, I think twice, where the seals to my canopy did not work properly. The bleed air did not inflate it properly to maintain a good seal, and I had a slow decompression. I didn't have a rapid decompression where something popped and all of a sudden it happened. But that does happen to people when you have ejections, or of course you have any kind of battle injury that might damage the canopy. And actually, and we're going to get to this later on in this class, we'll have accidents, and you'll be looking at accidents of planes. But one of the biggest threats for planes is birds. What if you're flying at 500 feet, 500 miles an hour, and you hit you hit any bird, it's bad, but a big bird is worse, like a turkey vulture. Is that good? A Canadian geese. Why do you say that?
Because they're the cause of most flight accidents in airports. Canadian geese are horrible for planes.
They are horrible for planes. I don't think it's the cause for most flight accidents, but I think the Canadian geese was the cause for the engines to go out for that famous accident up in New York with Sully. Everybody remember that? Where it landed on the Hudson River. That was bad. Canadian geese engines are bad, okay? It doesn't cause a rapid decompression, although we have had many fighter planes that have birds that hit your canopy, and all of a sudden you're flying along and your canopy will explode, and you would have a rapid decompression like we're talking about here in the text. And at that point, well, let's think about it. You're flying at 500 feet, 500 miles an hour, and you have a bird hit the canopy, and you have a rapid decompression as well as your canopy goes bye-bye, and you have a 500 mile an hour wind stream in your face. What is the first thing you might do?
Slow down.
Slow down. How do you slow down? You're going 500 feet, lots of mountains in front of you, lots of ground that can kill you. What's the first thing you do? The first thing you do is you pull back on the stick. Everybody in the jet actually is how you brief it, even the back seat of the Wizzo. If a bird hits the front, who's the first person he's going to hit?
The front.
The pilot, yes, and he could be dead. I mean, so the Wizzo, the backseater, is brief that if the pilot is dead, the navigator is in charge of the plane, okay? And he takes the plane and you would zoom it is what it's called. So you would pull back on the stick and you zoom it, get away from the ground, which will definitely kill you, and get up in the air and slow down the plane, because you don't want a 500 mile an hour wind blast. You want, a 200 or 250 mile an hour wind blast is a lot better. And so you get away from the aircraft, and then you reassess the situation, and of course, hopefully, be able to come back and land the plane. If there is a problem with your aircraft and your engines start to go out, then the American taxpayers gave you a fantastic situation called an ejection seat. Anybody ever heard of that?
Yes, sir.
Do commercial airliners have ejection seat? Does Delta? Gee, okay, well, we have a saying in the flying business that if God gives you an ejection seat, you might as well use it. Let's go to 251, page 251. It actually talks about an ejection seat there. There's a pretty good picture of one, actually. And you are literally sitting in that, just like Cadet Barrios. Where's Cadet Barrios? She's absent? Okay. She did a great job sitting there yesterday with all that protective equipment on. And this actually is a picture here behind me of an ejection seat that we have actually technicians that spend their whole life keeping pilots alive. They work on the ejection seats. They keep them charged up. You have to have very specific regulations following them so that they can come out of the aircraft. And let's see here if I have this set up here on my... Can you guys see this behind me? Yes. Okay, this is a picture off the internet, but this actually is a picture that I studied as a pilot of the ejection sequence coming out of a plane. And this is kind of generic, but it sort of looks like an F4 actually. Guys, can y'all please come over here on the side and stand at attention? I asked you to be quiet and y'all keep talking. Thank you. Okay, so at the bottom of this picture is a picture indication of a canopy coming off. When you're going 500 miles an hour, 480 was a normal low-level flight. How far does the canopy have to come out in order to come off the aircraft?
2 inches.
Very slow. Yes, exactly. Just a little part. If it's going 500 miles an hour, if it comes up an inch or two, it's going to be blown off the aircraft, no problem. And that's exactly what happens. The canopy separates immediately, and then after the canopy separates, there is a rocket motor underneath your seat that sends the entire seat out of the aircraft. If you look at this picture here in your book, this entire seat comes out of the aircraft with a rocket motor underneath it. And actually, this is I think this is an F-16 seat. Does it say that?
After.
Oh, F-22? Okay, my bad. F-22. See here, right here between this actual handle here, that is the handle that you pull to eject from the aircraft. And so when you eject from the aircraft, you have to get your body straight, your torso vertical, and you're ready to get a huge kick in the pants, as it's called. And I think the number's up to 22 Gs, instantaneous G forces, because it's having a rocket go off underneath your butt, okay, to send you out of the aircraft. And that is exactly what you're initiating when you pull this type of handle between your legs. You don't want to be leaning over, because guess what? If you're leaning over and your back's not straight, what happens to your back when 22 Gs go up? It's called breaking your back, okay? And yes, you may live, but yes, you may not walk the rest of your life, okay? When you eject from an aircraft, that is a bad day, I promise you. I have never had to eject, thank goodness, but my dear friend from one of my first actually backseaters, navigators I ever had to fly with, he ejected from an F4. And he has back injuries to this day. But you know what? He's alive. It was a bad situation. It was a rolling accident, and his pilot buddy died, and he lived. So it was when you eject, it is a bad situation. In general, pilots live when they eject, because these are incredibly sophisticated ejection sequences. You can actually eject upside downwards, and you will live from that. The ejection seat knows how to right itself properly. Yes?
So even if you both eject, is there a possibility of you crashing together?
That is an excellent question, and I actually will cover that right now. Look at on this on the sequence here that I have on the back seat. This is a picture of one pilot ejecting from the front seat. And again, maybe this is actually from not an F4, maybe this is an F-16 sequence. But in a dual sequence fighter, like my F-15E I flew, or the F-15B and D, which are two-seat fighters, then what happens is when the canopy comes off, it is gone. like in a microsecond, I don't know, 2/100ths of a second, okay? But then, if you think about it, you're the guy in the back seat. You don't want the guy in the front seat with his rocket motor to go off in your face, because then your face will be toast, literally. But so what they have is a dual sequence ejection so that the rear seater is ejected first. So the navigator leaves the aircraft first, because that rocket is behind you, and oh, by the way, you're going fast, so all the wind force goes before him. He is ejected first, and actually he is ejected on a different angle than you're ejected. So he's ejected first out of one side of the aircraft, and then the pilot is ejected out of the front of another angle out of the aircraft. And in that scenario that I just talked about, one of my Wizzo buddies ended up living, and the pilot ended up not living. The difference between the ejection of the front seat and the back seat, I think, is it's nothing. It's 5/100ths of a second. But that is what caused the pilot to die, because the aircraft was rolling so much that my Wizzo buddy ejected and lived, and the pilot died. Here you can see in the picture behind me that when you are ejected, you have the rocket motor coming out of the bottom of the, oops, the wrong way, bottom of the aircraft, and you're actually having up to 22 Gs. Then automatically a drogue chute, a small parachute, comes out of the back of the ejection seat, and that parachute, you see, is not very big. Maybe it's 3 or 4 feet long, and that is supposed to stabilize the ejection seat so that you're not tumbling. And it's supposed to slow you down to help you have drag and slow down from 400 or 500 miles an hour. There's also on YouTube actually a very good interview with another F-15E, actually a student of mine, who was the only person to live ejecting supersonically. And he lived. He was physically very messed up, and he was the pilot. In this case, the Wizzo died. But they ejected over the Atlantic, and he lived in this exact same scenario. So here's the drogue chute. He's slowing down the ejection, and then once it's slowed down to a particular airspeed, the drogue chute is automatically detached, and then the real huge chute is then ejected from the top of the ejection seat. And this real parachute is huge. I mean, it's 20 or 30 feet apart. We actually have some of a parachute just like this up in the ROTC that a lot of times I use with my PE class. Yes, Cody.
So, can the Wizzo eject by themselves without having the pilot eject them?
That is a very intelligent question, and the answer is yes. There's actually a ejection sequence handle that is in the back seat for the Wizzo. And so what if you're flying by yourself in a two-person aircraft? You don't want the rear, ejection seat to go out empty, and so you rotate it so it's either single sequence or dual sequence ejection. And that actually brings up another ejection story that I investigated as a mishap investigator, where there was a bird strike, and it came in the front cockpit, but guess what? It didn't hit the pilot. It hit the Wizzo behind it. It went right past the pilot's head. It would have decapitated the pilot, but it did not. It went right past his head and hit the Wizzo in the back seat. And the Wizzo was panicking. All of a sudden, he had blood and guts and stuff all over him. He didn't know if it was the pilot's blood and guts or it was a bird. And guess what? He flailed. His hands went up. He actually hit the dual sequence ejection handle, so it went from dual sequence to single sequence. And in single sequence, everybody has to pull the handle themselves. So the Wizzo, again, one of my friends went like this. He accidentally hit the handle, didn't know it, and he ejected himself by himself from the aircraft. When you're in a dual sequence fighter with two fighters and you eject one person, what happens?
The canopy is gone.
The canopy's gone, but all of a sudden the pilot is flying around in a convertible fighter by himself. And actually, I have a video of this. I should bring it, but this will be later on in the class. So the answer is the Wizzo ejected himself because he thought he was dying. Rightfully so. He was really messed up, had blood and guts all over him. He was just a bird. And then the front seater actually flew a convertible fighter and landed it in a remote airfield in England. and actually he got the award for the top pilot in the Air Force during emergency that year, awarded at the Pentagon. Brad Roberts, I can say his name. Good guy. Did a great job. So anyway, this is exactly what happened. This is the single seater ejects. You have a huge canopy coming down, and then there's something called man-seat separation. You don't want to be landing on the ground in a huge, big ejection seat, so you actually get the ejection seat kicked out of you with a rocket, and then once you slow down to a certain point, the ejection seat gets kicked away from you. You get separated from the ejection seat, and you know what? I don't think it is a rocket. I don't know exactly how that works. Maybe it's springs. That doesn't make any sense. Somehow you are separated from, oh, I know, it's airflow. You are strapped in with your harness to the seat, but that is automatically separated, and you are connected to the parachute, and the parachute with the airflow separates you from the seat, which means all this is floating around out there, right? I mean, that could hit you. That would hurt you. That would ruin your day, and then you come floating down in your parachute, and we are trained to, be able to parachute and survive on water or land or high trees. What do you think this thing right here is, float? What do you think that is, guys?
A ballast.
A ballast? That's a good point. That's it. The black screen is what it is, right? What is this thing? What do you think this is floating around right here, guys? Close. A single seat man raft. Because guess what? 75% of the world is covered in water. You could eject out of the water. So every time you eject, they actually have a survival kit at the bottom, a raft that automatically inflates, and all this is tied to you as a pilot, and he's guiding it in. And from yesterday, remember I thought about this last night, I should explain it, but remember I told you that every pilot has the actual parachute knife to order to cut some of these parachutes. This is an old-timey parachute. This is not what you see zinging down into the football stadiums during the Super Bowl coming up. But you can direct it. You can pull on it and it can turn left and right. But what happens if you come down in the forest of the northwest or the east where there's 100-foot trees? And then you're hanging down and you go, oh my God, I just ejected from 20,000 feet, I'm alive. I could die for the next 20 feet dropping down on my head. So you have these type of knives to be able to cut yourself out of a tree. And actually they do have a pretty sophisticated tree lowering device that is 50 or 70 feet high, and you actually climb down from the tree if you're separated. So this is all very sophisticated and designed to save you. I'm going to go through here is actually a video of an ejection sequence, and I think this is a Russian one. This is pretty neat, from a MiG-29. So why don't we watch this for a few minutes here. He's doing an air show. Let's see if I have any audio.
88. The sharply honed skills and instincts of test pilots make them especially adept in demonstrating new aircraft. And Anatoly Kovalychuk, a test pilot for the Soviet Mikoyan Design Bureau, is doing the flying. His remarkable tail slide, demanding for the pilot and engines of a high-performance jet and flown at low altitude, earned him attention and respect.
The maneuver is very difficult for our pilots on our aircraft. And we hope that all pilots will do that maneuver.
At the Paris show a year later, Kovalychuk flew again. On opening day of the show, in the middle of the afternoon, Kovalychuk initiated his flight routine. But after a turn out of the square loop in the midst of slow flight at 500 feet, something suddenly and dramatically went wrong with the right engine.
That's a bad day.
It went cold, as evidenced by the 20-foot liquid plane. What happened next was a classic twin-engine accident sequence. The power from the operating left engine pushed the airplane to the right. At so slow a speed, the pilot could not counteract the turn. and the airplane nose toward the ground. Had there been more altitude, it would have entered a right-hand spin or spiral. At this point, you can see that the left engine is operating, its upper intake vent wide open and sucking in air, its rear nozzle tight and delivering thrust normal. The dead right engine needs no air, its upper vents are closed, and the rear nozzle is splayed open. Couverture said later his first instinct was to save the aircraft. When that became impossible, he directed the airplane toward the grassy area to prevent injury to people on.
Okay, you can see the ejection sequence starting here with the individual canopy coming open, and then immediately the ejection seat comes out. The Russian ejection seats are different than the Americans, and at one time they were much better because guess what? Their planes crashed a lot more than ours did. But it's the same sequence, same idea, same sequence. And this is really amazing that he was able to eject, and he got a canopy and actually was able to have one swing, and he's on the ground, he's walking away. I mean, it's amazing technology that saves the pilots.
The ground. When that was guaranteed, he...
So you see that right before that, you saw the canopy separating, and then the
people on the ground.
canopy.
When that was...
Yeah, there you go. That's a great picture, actually. Canopy, and then you see the rocket motor that coming out. Can you now see why, if you're a backseater, you don't want to have that rocket motor in your face?
Yeah.
You want to have it coming out and saving your life. He's actually what the plane is heading straight down, and he's coming out at an angle.
Guaranteed, he saved himself and yanked the ejection seat handle. He punched out none too soon. A bit over two.
Look at this. He just barely got a canopy to slow him down in order to land and save himself.
Seconds before the airplane hit, his parachute fully opened when he was only a few feet above ground. Again, as the airplane hit, you can see the left engine carrying power to impact explodes a last gasp of firing thrust as the airplane crumples into the grass. The cause of the accident? Damage to the right engine earlier in the
Great picture, American flag.
Sucked into the engine. Now at Dayton, the airplane was back in the air with Big Chief Test Pilot Valery Minitsky at the controls, and the fly was better than ever.
Okay, so that was a Russian picture. This is a very, very famous Thunderbird. Does everybody understand what the Thunderbirds is? The Air Force demonstration team based out of Las Vegas, Nellis Air Force Base, Las Vegas. And this was another good news ejection, meaning he lived. Yes?
I saw a video last night of a U.S. Marine pilot taking off vertically, and the nose dropped, but he regained it and took off.
He was lucky to make it. He didn't have to eject. This is an amazing ejection where the Thunderbird pilot was doing his demonstration in front of tens of thousands of people at an air show, and basically he realized that he messed up. And instead of riding it into the ground, which people have done, he ejected last second and made it. It's a pretty spectacular display here.
Clearly visible is Thunderbird pilot Chris Strickland as he ejects. The shot was so perfect, some on our staff at first thought it was a fake. But the event occurred September 14, 2003 at Mountain Home Air Force Base, Idaho, in front of an estimated crowd of 85,000. A report released in 2004 found that prior to the flight, Strickland had miscalculated the altitude for the split S maneuver, rolling inverted too early and robbing himself of a full 830 feet of recovery space. As the ground closed in, Strickland used maximum stick deflection, and the jet did achieve a nose-up angle prior to impact, but it could not halt its descent. Strickland ejected just 140 feet above the ground, 0.8 of a second before impact. He sustained minor injuries, but the $20 million aircraft was lost. A large piece seen bounding across the ground may be the aircraft's single heaviest component, its engine. In this ultra-slow motion footage, aerodynamically induced condensation streams illustrate the extreme forces exerted as Strickland fights to save the aircraft. His left hand becomes active, and as the canopy is blown back, his right hand finally leaves the side-mounted control stick to assure his arm is not broken or lost.
And so this is the exact same seat, so he's actually having to grab between his legs and eject. Here's the perfect example of the canopy being separated. Do you see how close the ground is underneath him? 0.8 of a second. Think about it, guys. Everybody say the word Mississippi.
Mississippi.
You're dead. Because that is 1 second. Okay? 0.8 of a second. If he had waited, he would have been dead. And this is amazing. You never hear of a guy realizing that these guys are perfect, right? They do hundreds of air shows, and one time he goes, "This isn't exactly perfect, and I'm gonna save myself." This is amazing. This is amazing. You never hear of people not making mistakes, but this guy did a good job.
During ejection, 0.2 of a second later.
Did you see his hand was between his legs when it came up?
Later in real time, the onboard camera goes dead. Still images from the show line capture Strickland's chute opening as the aircraft impacts the ground and show the subsequent explosion. Aside from the aircraft, no damage was done to property, civilian or military. Camera goes dead. Still images from the show.
What is a problem when a pilot ejects real close to the ground and the impact of the plane? What might be a problem? Ha! Yeah. Yes, I have had friends that have ejected, and when the biggest threat is not the ejection, it's landing in the fireball. That's kind of a bad day too. You're going to save your life, and all of a sudden then you're in the injection. In here you can see, what is this thing on the far left? What's this? What's this? Canopy, parachute, pilot, and actually he's still in the seat, I guess. Man seat separation.
Show line captures Strickland's chute opening as the aircraft impacts the ground and show the subsequent explosion. Aside from the aircraft, no damage was done to property, civilian or military. For his mistake, Strickland no longer flies with the Thunderbirds, but the event has resulted in procedural changes for the pilots who do. The investigative board found that Thunderbirds require its pilots to convert mean sea level and above ground level altitudes and then perform the maneuver with a limited margin of error. Those tasks were found to be contributing factors in this accident. For his final maneuver as a Thunderbirds pilot, Strickland had calculated and flown to 1,670 feet above ground at Mountain Home. He had used the wrong airport altitude. A proper calculation would have directed him to an altitude of 2,500 feet above the base. Even before he left the ground, the accident sequence had begun. And once Strickland started his pull, the outcome was all but sealed. Staff Sergeant Benny J. Davis III, still photographer, U.S. Air Force, was stationed on the tower's catwalk to photograph the performance. He said he waited for the aircraft to level and clicked the shutter. The result is an image that captures the pivotal moment in one man's life, and it's stunningly real. As a result of this accident, the Air Force required the Thunderbird pilots to climb an extra 1,000 feet before starting the split S maneuver. For them, the show must go on.
All righty, excellent. So let's in review for this last part of the chapter here. We'll go through flight simulators next time, but we talked about the partial pressure, rapid decompression, and ejection seat and parachutes. We will start on page 253 next time.